Over the past few weeks, we have studied from the book of Proverbs, and one of the admonitions that we have seen is the importance of walking in the light of God's teachings. We should take advice on how we should live and apply that to our lives. It requires us at times when we take God's advice, it requires of us at times to sacrifice our wants and our desires when they conflict with the path that God would have us travel. Not only do we understand the potential need to change the direction of our paths at times, we are also given much advice about how to stay off the wayward road. We are warned of people and places that we should avoid. We are warned of actions and attitudes that we should demonstrate. God is warning us of things that can lead us down the path of destruction, yet for many they proceed full steam ahead. Then, when the inevitable happens, people look for the answers to why. Rather than accepting the responsibilities of their failures and their sin, many attempt to transfer responsibility to others or to circumstances. The employee who steals from his employer blames the employer for not paying them enough or making it so easy to steal. The student who gets in trouble blames peer pressure for their actions, while unfortunately, many times the parents of the student also blame the evil influence of others upon their angelic child. The husband that leaves his wife of his youth blames others for his wandering eye or for lack of fidelity. For many, they never accept the responsibility for their actions and are always looking for someone else to blame. They tell us they are good people, yet what they do is far from what they claim to be. If you want to turn to Matthew chapter 12 for a short text there, Jesus is speaking, Matthew chapter 12, verses 33 through 37. It gives us some insight into an idea of what we've been talking about. Matthew 12, 33 through 37. Either make the tree good and its fruit will be good, or make the tree bad and its fruit will be bad. For a tree is known by its fruit. Brood of vipers, how can you speak good things when you are evil? For the mouth speaks from the overflow of the heart. A good person produces good things from his storeroom of good, and an evil person produces evil things from his storeroom of evil. I tell you that on the day of judgment, people will have to account for every careless word they speak. For by your words you will be acquitted, and by your words you will be condemned. See, Jesus has a different way of thinking about life, doesn't he? It's not others or the circumstances that cause people to sin. It's attitudes that they have in their heart. From the halls of Congress to the halls in our schools, our actions demonstrate our attitudes. From the place where we work to the place where we worship, attitudes shape our actions. From our homes to the hotels, our actions are directed by our attitudes. That's why Romans 12:1 challenges us to be transformed by the renewing of our minds so that you may discern what is good and pleasing, perfect will of God. We live in a world that wants to accept everything and deny nothing. Our nation can't come to reasonable consensus on anything today, it seems. The condoning of sin has become acceptable. Advertisements to get you to buy more alcohol and to gamble away your money come with the disclaimer to drink and gamble responsibly. And if you have a problem, get help. But buy our products. Boys claiming to be girls are playing in girls' sports and are in their locker rooms, and yet now in some people's own enlightenment, that which would have never been considered a generation ago, today has forced our nation to consider what to do, how to treat the least among us, has been blurred over policies implemented by the powerful. Government treasuries have become the personal piggy banks of politicians who send money back home for pet projects in order to remain in power. Actions are demonstrated by attitudes. Attitudes are demonstrated by actions. And yet God speaks straightforwardly when the psalmist says in Psalm 33:12, "Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, the people who he has chosen for his own inheritance." See, there is no doubt that if a nation's attitude aligns with God's, then people's actions would show that alignment, and the lives of people would be much better off. Solomon understood the importance of how our attitudes shape our actions. And he is telling his son to listen and apply to his life what his father is telling him. And by doing this, his son's life will be improved because his actions will be reflective of the attitude of these teachings that he is providing to him. If you want to turn into our scriptures or for our text for the day, it's Proverbs chapter 3, verses 1 and following. We're going to look at the first 4 verses initially, and then we'll finish up with the next 8 verses, go from 1 through 12 today. Proverbs chapter 3. Solomon is writing to his son, or speaking to his son, and we have this recorded. "My son, don't forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commands, for they will bring you many days of full life and well-being. Never let loyalty and faithfulness leave you. Tie them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Then you will find favor and high regard with God and people." It's said that we remember about 10% of what we learn or hear in the classroom. If that's accurate, and I would probably say that it does have some veracity if we think about pop quizzes and how often people don't do well on those when they don't have an opportunity to cram and study for a test. If that's the case, then Solomon is trying to tell his son not to forget. Take extra effort to listen and don't forget my teachings. Solomon is telling his son to internalize these teachings and commands, and he was to place them deep within his core beliefs. That part of us that directs who we are. Jesus spoke of the importance of the heart. Now we know when Jesus was talking about that, he wasn't talking about the muscle that beats within our chest. But the heart, the attitude, the character of who we are, that deep down who we are, that's our heart. See, sin or goodness, they don't flow through our veins because our heart is pumping. But it flows from us because our heart's actions are driven by our beliefs and our attitudes. good attitudes produce good fruit. And so Solomon is telling his son, don't forget. Don't forget my teachings. Let your heart keep my commands. Bury them deep within your soul to change who you are and to let that be who you are. And in verse 2, he gives him the benefit of why. He says the benefit is many days, a full life, well-being. Wow. How many of us would not prefer that over strife and stress? But what we must realize is that this verse is a general thought, but not a guarantee to a long life. Just because we bury within our heart God's commands and keep his teachings doesn't guarantee us a long life here on earth. Someone who succumbs to a premature death, that does not mean that they have sinful or are evil or ignored the teachings of the Lord. See, things happen, and this verse cannot be taken as a guarantee of a long life, but it's one that tells us that when we walk in the light of God's teachings, our life can be prosperous and can be long and will be full and will have well-being. As he continues on, his next word of guidance is that loyalty and faithfulness are deeply important. As we pursue God as a loyal and faithful servant, he shows us his faithfulness and his loyalty as well. See, this helps us to see that our relationship with Christ, our following God's teaching, does indeed bless our lives. I'm reminded of the old hymns. One of them with the chorus that says, Jesus knows all about our struggles. He will guide till the day is done. There's not a friend like the lowly Jesus. No, not one. No, not one. He understands. He empathizes. We read about that in the book of Hebrews, how he understands because he was tempted like we were, but yet was without sin. He knows what we go through because he walked this road. He is a dear friend, and there's no one like him. Or what about the other hymn that says, what a friend we have in Jesus, all our sins and griefs to bear. What a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer. Oh, what peace we often forfeit. Oh, what needless pain we bear, all because we do not carry everything to God in prayer. See, that hymn gives us encouragement to lay before the Father and experience the peace that he can give. But so often we forfeit that peace by not sharing with him our heart's petitions and our prayers. If you, my friend, are looking for a friend who will stick by your side, let me tell you about Jesus. When we walk with him, he will never leave us alone. Even in the darkest of hours, even in the deepest of valleys, or the highest mountaintop experience you can go through, Jesus will always be by your side if you desire him. He will be there because of his faithfulness and his loyalty. He will never forsake us. Jesus told his disciples there in Matthew 28, lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the ages. As we go on in our text there in chapter 3, verse 5, possibly one of the famous verses in Proverbs because many people have heard it. Look, picking up there at verse 5 through verse 12. He says, then you will understand What's he talking about, the then? If you are placing, accepting, or excuse me, I'm in chapter 2. Let's go back to verse 5 of chapter 3. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not rely on your own understanding. In all your paths acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. Don't be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. This will be healing for your body and strengthening for your bones. Honor the Lord with your possessions, with the first produce of your entire harvest. Then your barns will be completely filled, and your vats will overflow with new wine. Do not despise the Lord's instruction, my son. Do not loathe his discipline, for the Lord disciplines the one he loves, just as a father disciplines the son in whom he delights. Verses 5 through 7 are well-known verses. They remind us once again that the heart is not the muscle in our chest, but the seat of our intellect. The heart is the place that directs our actions. And when we look around at life, we see that life is complex. Life cannot not always be pigeonholed into simple categories. It's too complex. It can be hard living in this type of environment, especially for the person who views or wants to view the world as black and white. I struggle with gray areas. I'm a black and white guy. I'm comfortable with that. Right and wrong. And although I struggle with gray areas, I still believe that there's more black and white, right and wrong, than others may want to admit. Nevertheless, what we understand is that the complexity of life sometimes can overwhelm us, and we need to have an anchor for our soul. We need that solid rock upon which we can build our lives that is guided by this verse. Trust in the Lord and not on our own understanding. That can be hard. That means sometimes we have to struggle with what's going on in the world. That means that sometimes we have to wrestle with events in life, whether it's in our personal life or whether it's in the society that we live in. Trust in the Lord, not on our own understanding. You see, the Lord that gives us a firm foundation that doesn't change. That's why the restoration movement came about. That's why churches like ours came about. See, over 200 years ago, men and women wanted to get back to the practices of the first century church, to that church that was closest to the time that Jesus lived on earth. They wanted to find and go back to the church that was found in the Scriptures, and to allow the Scriptures to guide the lives of the people and the polity of congregations. That's why you see independent bodies of believers not beholden to synods or conferences, but to the Scriptures, and guided by elders, as found in the New Testament blueprint of how a congregation should function and exist in society. See, it's that firm foundation that we can build our life on from God. And by doing that, they knew that these churches formed that were not formed by man's intentions or man-made intentions, but God designed bodies of believers following his teachings and desires. That, my friend, is why we practice the Lord's Supper every week. because we saw that in the New Testament church as the people, as the Christians gathered together for communion. That is why we practice baptism by immersion, totally going under the water as described in Acts 2, where one receives the forgiveness of their sins and the receiving of the Holy Spirit into their life. That's why we have elders who lead the congregation and deacons who serve along beside them, not delegations hundreds of miles away dictating local governance. When we trust in the Lord, in the unchanging way of God, whether it's in our church life or our personal lives, rather than leaning on our own understanding, then we experience life in a much better way than if we attempt to usurp that authority from God. Now, much of the remainder of the text speaks of the benefits to our lives when we trust in God and acknowledge His ways. When we turn away from evil, as it says there in verse 7, our life indeed does get better. However, it's not a guarantee of a life without trials, is it? Look at some of the blessings found in this text. In verse 2, we see a prolonged life. In verse 4, we see favor and a good name with God and people. In verse 6, we see about prosperity. In verse 8, we see health and vitality of life. In verse 10, we see barns and vats full and overflowing. Some will take these verses and cherry pick them with others and promote a gospel that says if you're found in favor with God, then you'll be healthy and wealthy. If you do your part, God will bless you no matter what. But if you fail, if you fall, if you falter or stumble, God won't bless you. Well, that erroneous teaching is why it's so important that we preach the entire gospel, not just proof text to justify one's beliefs. Think about it for a moment. If that were all true, if we only had prolonged life, found favor with God and people, prosperity, health, and vitality of life, barns and vats full of overflowing, if that were true, if you were faithful to God, you got all that, then let me ask you a question. Who is the most righteous person to ever have walked on the face of the earth? I think that'd be pretty easy to answer, isn't it? Be Jesus. Jesus. Think about it. Think about how old he was when he died. Approximately 33 years old. How many of us would consider dying at 33 a prolonged life? As Solomon says, that you'll have a prolonged life if you keep my commandments and bury them deep within your heart. You'll have a prolonged life. How many, we read there in verse 4, favor with men. Indeed, he did find favor with some men, but others despised him to the point that they wanted to kill him. Prosperity, of course, he was prosperous, but not in the ways that society rates prosperity. Healthy and vitality of life, of course he had a healthy and vital life. He was fully alive even though he faced strong opposition. He enjoyed life and people. And then what about the promise of overflowing barns if you're faithful to God? Overflowing barns and vats. That did not necessarily apply to Jesus, did it? Because he tells us that he didn't even have a place to lay his head. See, what I'm trying to show you is that our relationship to God, or our blessings that we receive, aren't just always based upon our faithfulness of who we are. If you're a good person, you're going to be healthy and wealthy. You're going to have all these blessings, but if you're bad, you're not. I look around and see a lot of bad people have a lot of possessions. They have health. They have possessions. They're enjoying life. So how do we put that together? Does it mean that Jesus didn't experience what God had in mind for him? Of course not. He didn't experience long life on earth, but he reigns eternally, seated next to the Father. His name is above all names, that every knee shall bow in heaven and earth. He walked on dusty roads as a man, but now he dwells where the streets are paved with gold. See, Jesus would say the prosperity gospel is no gospel at all. And that, my friend, is why it's important to trust God and apply all God's words and not cherry-pick text just to support one's beliefs. That brings us to the conclusion of our text, and Solomon's there in verses 11 through 12. Do not despise the Lord's instruction, my son. Do not loathe his discipline, for the Lord disciplines the one he loves, just as the Father disciplines the Son he delights in. How many of us like to be disciplined? How many of us like to be corrected? Whether that discipline comes in the form of a verbal correction or a more painful type of discipline, most of us don't like that. Yet Solomon tells his son that God disciplines those he loves, just like a father disciplines his children. What we must understand is that discipline is not to be confused with punishment. Discipline has a purpose to guide and or correct an action. We discipline our children out of love. It can be a word of correction when they are doing wrong, or it could be more severe, depending upon what they need. I remember my father's discipline. I remember when I was driving, learning to drive, almost like I can remember it just like it was yesterday, but it was over 50 years ago. You ever remember where you were on such and when something took place? You just remember it. Then there's other things that I can't remember to save me. But I remember this event. We were driving the truck. We were driving north on the Centerville Blacktop. You all know where that is, don't you? And right before we get to the Skillet Fork River, you all know where that is, there's a curve. And you all know how that curve is really fairly sharp. And I'm driving along, and apparently because he thought I was going a little bit too fast, he told me I probably ought to slow down going into that curve. Because of all his years of driving experience, he understood what the truck was going to do as I entered that curve. Because as I entered that curve and the curve went to the left, if I would have kept the speed up, if you've driven any, you know that that car is going to go, or that vehicle is going to go out into the curve. And there was a deep embankment. There was a guardrail, but there was pretty deep embankment because we were getting into the bottoms of the Skillet Fork area. My dad was disciplining me by teaching through this teaching moment. He was calm. He was direct. And I obliged. And we survived because I'm still here. I remember that event. Dad says, slow down. And he told me why. He explained it to me. He was disciplining me. He was trying to help me understand. That event was a little bit different than the night that I took his truck out, ran out of gas, and burned up a fuel pump. Needless to say, he wasn't quite as calm. But I also learned from that experience, and I don't ever recall running out of gas again. Discipline comes in different forms, and God disciplines us in order that we would be on the right path and get us on the right path, and that at times takes discipline. This concept must be important for us to understand, as the writer of Hebrews in chapter 12 references this text from Proverbs 3. He uses this exact same text. And then he adds some words to it. If you want to turn to Hebrews chapter 12, verse 7, you're going to see what this discipline involves and means and the importance of it. The importance of Solomon's teachings to get us to follow God's commands, have them deep within our hearts, in order that we can live the way that God would have us to live. And sometimes we have to be disciplined or guided or instructed on how to live. And so there in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 7, if you find James, go back one verse or one book. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 7, endure suffering as a discipline. God is dealing with you as sons. For what son is there that a father does not discipline? But if you are without discipline, which all receive, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Furthermore, we had human fathers discipline us, and we respected them. Shouldn't we submit even more to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us, speaking of our earthly fathers, for a short time based on what seemed good to them. But he does it for our benefit so that we can share his holiness. No discipline seems enjoyable at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. Therefore, strengthen your tired hands and weakened knees, and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be dislocated, but healed instead. God's teachings are to shape, his commands and his teachings are to shape our attitudes, who we are. We should transform from one of self-focused and self-centered living to that which Christ would have us, and that being Christ-focused and Christ living. The more Christ-like we shape our lives, the better our life will be. And in him, we experience a life that is full and rich, because we will be walking with the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords.